Hi, welcome to valuationpodcast.com, a podcast and video series about all things related to business and valuation. My name is Melissa Gragg, and I'm a valuation expert in St. Louis, Missouri. During this episode, we will actually be discussing the current M&A landscape and how to use business valuations as one of the steps when getting prepared to sell your business. We have Greg Caruso here, who is a JD or attorney. He's a CPA and a business broker who lives in New Jersey, right outside of New York City, and works in Maryland and all over the Mid-Atlantic. Welcome, Greg. How are you?
It's a pleasure to be here, Melissa. And I would like to say I'm sort of a recovering attorney. I certainly use those skills. I don't practice law a whole lot at this point.
Yeah, I was excited to see the whole JD CPA. That's pretty impressive.
I was ambitious as a child.
So let's talk about fun stuff. And what are you seeing right now from a mergers and acquisition standpoint, or even a valuation perspective? Are you seeing heavy activity, mergers, things like that going on?
When COVID and the shutdowns, homestays, whatever your state called it, if you had it, and being outside New York City, we are just starting to open back up. And Maryland is very similar. They got it a little later, but they did get it. It all stopped. But I would say in the last 30 days, it has really picked back up. And even my assistant who processes non-disclosures and all of that was like, we're getting crazy busy here. So there is a tremendous interest, at least. We will see if it results in deals, but there is a tremendous interest, frankly, on both sides in trying to get some things done. I'm trying to get M&A transactions done.
Well, and I think that everybody kind of pressed the pause button, because you couldn't even do some of the due diligence or visit any locations if you couldn't travel, if you had to stay in your house. I mean, just the logistics of that is kind of interesting. Yeah.
Well, so, even now I've got situations, let's face it. A lot of sellers are in their 60s and 70s. A lot of them spend a lot of time in Florida, and I have a couple of them who didn't come back this summer. A couple of them have, but a couple of them are just continuing to operate their business from Florida. Mm-hmm. So due diligence on those is going to be really interesting because the company's up here and the sellers down there, and most of the employees of a lot of these are continuing to work virtually. They don't even come into the office. So how do you really get the feel for who you're really buying in the case of professional company, professional practices, if you can't meet your employees? So well, it's going to be interesting.
And we've seen a lot of discussions happening over Zoom. So you're seeing buyers and sellers, it's a little bit harder to cultivate the beginnings of that relationship when you're just over online. I mean, a lot of it's done in person and things like that. So that kind of creates a little difficulty as well.
Zoom is I would say Zoom has become a very good tool. What's really nice about it is it's a big time saver for that first meeting, where if it's really obvious, there's just not going to be a connection or a level of trust, or if it's a big travel and you're not sure if you want to do it, it really helps that step. But yes, traditionally, there sort of is a step where we as humans like to size up who we're going to do a very significant to our life deal with in person. And, we did one the other day with everybody en masse and staying at opposite ends of the conference room table. And that's a little odd too.
Yeah. Everything's a little odd right now. But
Yes.
if we go back to the very beginning, like when you're getting prepared, if you're trying to figure out how you can sell your business, one of the
Hmm.
questions that I think we get a lot is about pricing. So, or they say, should I sell a business for?
Hmm.
How are you handling some of these pricing questions during this time period?
Well, we're handling it two ways. There is always the pricing issue. And again, I think a lot of the buyer interest is they think they're going to steal something. And there are some sellers who are a little more motivated than they were. But, if you're operating in a state, I have a remodeler that's restarting up because he was subject to a shutdown order. Well, he's willing to give you a really good price, but you do have some additional risk in that his cash flows this year have an explainable problem, but and he's going to give you a really good discount for it, but it's not risk free. You're not getting that great deal because everything is normal, and so that's why when I say we'll see what happens. Now I've got a lot of strong interest on him. And frankly, if he doesn't have another shutdown order, there's a good chance because of his discount, and it really looks like a sound business that he will be fine. So what I would say with how do we handle the pricing, it's, what is your real risk? I just did a valuation on a liquor store. Well, I actually didn't add all of this year's results in because it looks like they're having a bubble that's probably not long-term sustainable. Um, they're easy. I mean, they're not having problems. When you get into the businesses that are having shutdown orders or an accounting firm that maybe has, you're going to have to start looking at what is the product mix of the business owners or the industry mix. And you're going to have to assess the risk of those future cash flows. Nothing has changed other than the ability to predict the risk and then the risk factors and how everyone in the process is going to view them. Nobody's quite sure how to review them. I'm pretty comfortable. Most people right now have a heightened sense of risk, which reduces value. So then the other half of the equation is maybe you need a little better price. Maybe you're going to have to share in the risk, which can be price. Maybe you're going to get 2/3 at closing and a third on an earnout tied into something post closing, because nobody can get, because my seller is convinced the future's going to be bright and the buyer is comfortable enough that it's going to be okay, but they're not, they're maybe not willing to pay top dollar unless they get downstream results. So I think we're going to see a lot more hedging and earnouts and downstream adjustments for people who want to move forward. They're going to share the risk.
Well, and I think that it's interesting because when you have a background in business valuation and in selling companies, and I think that sometimes business brokers will do kind of a smaller version of a valuation. Can you walk people kind of through that process that you go in, knowing the valuation side, but also knowing the market? Are you doing a traditional valuation? Or are you just kind of crunching some numbers to know their cash flow? Tell us some tricks of the trade.
Well, you will know I've been doing valuation a while because I will tell you the answer is it depends, which, is all of our joke for it's the answer of everything.
Right.
What I would say is I certainly don't do a full opinion of value because I'm not developing a court case. The market is going to prove me right or wrong. And what we're really going to do is we're going to go out and we're going to build you a market. That's what we do as brokers. And we're going to try to get you and we've been very successful at it the last couple of years. We're going to get you 3 or 4 letters of intent, and then we're going to play them off each other. And that's, creating the fear of loss is how we really find out the real sales price and what someone will really pay, through that process of, now somebody's liked it enough that they've done some underwriting and they put an offer in, and now I'm telling them we're going to take it away because Bob over here is paying more. Mm-hmm. That's really when the rubber meets the road on pricing. But as far as for valuation, if it's a very small business, which frankly means I'm probably going to refer it at this point, but I'll still sometimes take a look for people. We're doing I call them a flat Excel spreadsheet. We're looking at the cash flows. If they have inventory, we may or may not do an adjustment based on inventory on these very small ones. But that's it. It's almost a rule of thumb. A very good small business sells with a 400,000 seller's discretionary cash flow, which is every way one owner is making money out of a business. They'll sell for 2.8. If it's a tougher industry, they're going to sell, and by tougher, like auto repair, where you're constantly, a good mechanic knows he can get a job anywhere. So there's a lot of turnover. There's a lot of those 2, maybe 2.5 if it's a great one, 2 times. So again, we're almost doing rules of thumb. We are making reasonable efforts to get the cash flow in the ballpark, because I'm looking at it, and as I tell prospective listings, if I think it's worth $1 million and you think it's worth $2 million, we probably aren't. You're probably not ready. If you think it's worth $1.3 million and I think it's worth $1 million, this, who knows? It's certainly worth talking some more and really learning what's going on. Now, if the business is a little larger, we'll do a calculation of value. Again, I will do some level of verification of the cash flows, not like a third-party valuation if I'm handing to a bank, but we'll do some level, depending what it is and how we can verify it, and we will then really look at the comps. Maybe if there aren't a lot of comps, talk to some other brokers to see if they have a sense. Certainly occasionally use the income method. My view is for businesses under 5 million of value, I'm a believer in the market method, but it's probably because I came out of brokerage. Over 5 million, it really just depends on the data that's out there to use. And often it needs to be income, because you do get into a dearth of data, kind of between 5 million and 50 million. It's too small to use public company data, and there just are not enough private company comps.
Yeah, I mean, most of the time we're having to purchase databases with private company comps, and basically a private company comparable. So we're looking at other sales. What does it mean for our transaction? But another question that I have has to do with, what have you been seeing in the valuation multiples or the EBITDA multiples moving up or down during the pandemic? And I think in addition to this question, though, you use 2 other terms, which I think business owners should be aware of: rules of thumb and seller's discretionary earnings. And so how are you, because a lot of business owners will say, well, I know the EBITDA multiple is between 4 and 5, but what is really happening out there? Are multiples moving, or is everybody just looking at the specific deal and trying to figure out what to do next?
It's deal by deal, but I would say either the multiples are dropping or there's going to be a significant A larger portion is going to be earnout. It's going to be subject to downstream results. Because the perception of risk is so high. Now, the reality is when a lot of sellers find that out, they just pull it from the market. So I'm not, I know there's a lot of people looking and a lot of people talking, but SBA isn't even going to start closing loans again till July 1st because they've been so wrapped in the PPP. So up to about 2.5 or 3 million in value, the deals that typically would go SBA, they haven't even been able to finance. And so again, I think we're in that never land. We'll really know what's going on in multiples in 3 or 4 or 5 months when deals start happening, or maybe not. But I can tell you the perception right now is risk is up, cash flow projections to the extent buyers are willing to work for them are coming down, and the risk factor, which means the discount rate, is going up or the multiplier is going down. And that is certainly the perception. And, if I was doing a valuation, I would be and I've got a couple coming, we will be factoring that in, because otherwise you're just going to sit out there. I've got a very good business right now, but he's with a younger seller. When we started our adventure in early January, we didn't know all this was going to happen. In an ideal market, he's priced okay, but it's a really good business. He's 45. He's ready to sell it at, a premium price, but it's getting very little activity today. And again, that's one indication of the market. The market has shifted downward.
Because in the most simplest terms, if you're looking at an income approach and evaluation, it's cash flow and risk. So if cash flow is going down and risk is going up, just by nature, the multiples are going down. But I think that people want a crystal ball, and we don't know how things are going to move in the future. But one question I have that I'm getting a lot of in talking to small business owners, it seems like they are still being approached by buyers. So what is your advice if somebody comes and asks them if their business is for sale?
If you are comfortable with the person looking at you, and again, sometimes if it's a competitor, there may not be that comfort. If they get a really good non-disclosure signed that includes not stealing key employees, that includes not taking key customers. Now, if you already share customers, which many competitors will do in many market areas, maybe you need a carve out for them, but they already know the guys or gals. But get a good non-disclosure signed, and there's nothing to be hurt by exploring. What I tell buyers who come to me, I tell them right off, look, I'm a broker. There's a certain percentage of buyers. If you really know what you want, there's a certain percentage of buyers who aren't going to talk to me because they're not going to pay or sellers, they're not going to pay my brokerage fee. They're just not. And if I call them, they're going to say they're not on the market, because even if you're paying their brokerage fee, they know somebody's paying me a brokerage fee. If you call them direct, they may well talk to you. What you got to understand is on most of my listings, I talk to them a year before they list, because the sort of shock of reality of what we're going to sell for. I get a huge number of calls. I am ready to sell, Greg. I am so done. I'm great. Have you ever had a valuation done? No. Well, let's start there. And 30 days, 3 weeks, whatever it takes to get all the data and get it done. And you go back to them and they're like, well, at that number, I may have to run it another, I think I'll keep it forever at that number. And then usually what happens is a year later, They come back and they go, all right, I'm sure they checked with their accountant. They talked to the 2 or 3 people who they always knew always wanted to buy them. And they are ready to move on. The one thing we talk about in business brokerage, and it sounds cynical, but it's not. You're a seller when your time is worth more than your money. Because you are always, if you run your business well and you have a reasonable market, you are always going to make more money running it for 3 or 4 years than you're going to make selling it. You just are. So until you're ready to get over that hurdle of, gee whiz, I could make that in 3 years, that's true. Unless you're in an industry where Google wants to buy you for something that's a different world, your typical cash flow, well-run business, 3 or 4 years, is all you're gonna sell for. So if you're not over that hurdle, you're not a seller. You may have a very good business, and one day you're a seller. And I would even say you might want to be talking to people if there's a couple people in your industry that acquire. It doesn't hurt to be talking to them. You'll know where you stand. And sometimes it makes sense to go out and try to get a subcontract or try to get a contract or try to do a joint venture with a logical buyer. Because again, what are we talking about? There's 2 ways we increase your price. We reduce your risk, which if somebody feels they know you and knows your operation and feels good about it, that reduces risk, at least to that buyer. The second thing is improve your cash flows. People come to me all the time and go, I'm gonna work really hard and grow fast. And it's like, no, not unless you're in an industry that when you're growing fast, you're also increasing your bottom line. Growing is expensive. You make all kinds of mistakes. You're spending advertising dollars. In a lot of industries, you get a good client, you're going to milk them for 4 or 5 years. But the year you get them, you don't make anything off them. It might take 18 months to get back what it costs between advertising and extra sales process and business valuation, and particularly business brokerage. It is a short-term process. Your business is going to get viewed just like you ever viewed your salesman. You got a salesman who made the record sales 5 years ago. You pat him on the back and go, that's great. What are you doing for me tomorrow? That's how buyers underwrite your business. That was great what you did 5 years ago. We're really happy to see it. But what are you doing next year, the next 18 months? That's what I'll pay you for. If it's beyond that, I'm doing it. That's why I'm buying a business. People come to me all the time. It's got so much potential. Apple seeds have potential, but I don't pay for the apple, and I certainly don't pay for the tree. I pay for an apple seed. Your business is the same way. So if you want to talk about how you increase your value, it's we have a saying for that too in business brokerage. If you want to get paid for it, do it. Prove it.
Mm-hmm. Because I think a lot of times business owners are like, well, I'm a $5 million company or I'm a $10 million company in revenue. And the problem is a $10 million company in revenue that makes $1 million on the bottom line is worth more than makes $100,000 on the bottom line. So it's not necessarily just increasing revenue. It's what are you doing about the cash flow? Because that's whether you call it EBITDA, seller's discretionary earnings, it's still cash flow that a buyer is looking at to try to see if they can maintain. That's not necessarily directly connected to you as the business owner, but it's transferable in some respect. So let's say a buyer gets a non-disclosure. Mm-hmm. Then what? Do you see, sometimes I think that they should at least get some smart people on their team, even if it's not the main negotiator, right? Even if they want to negotiate.
Yeah, let me say a couple things to what you've said. Number one, my dad ran what today would be $1 billion business. He was a minority owner, CEO, and his attitude was make money today. Mm-hmm. There's always a reason. Make money today. And as a business owner, especially when thinking of selling, there is no better guidance. Find a way, reduce your costs, find a way, make money today. Number two, and that will always help your value. Always. As long as you got systems, as long as you got processes, but make them tight. Lean is not a new thing, even if it's sort of an in conversation. Be lean. The second thing is, if somebody approached me, the first thing I would do is I would get a quick and dirty valuation of some, again, appropriate to the size. Mm-hmm. Let's face it. If you've got, I hate to say this, but if you're talking about just rough ballpark, because someone's going to come talk to me, it takes me 15 minutes to look at 3 years tax returns for a retailer, for a small distributor, for a, now as you get bigger, yes, it needs a real valuation because there's always things out there, but at least have some ballpark from an accountant, from somebody that knows valuation too. I mean, part of the problem is the things I see well-intended accountants do who don't know valuation. And now I don't know tax. I'm not going to look at your tax returns and start telling you what you should be doing there either. Don't get me wrong. But get somebody who really understands valuation, and certainly a tax advisor, perhaps even if it starts to get serious at all, an attorney. For one thing, you want to make sure your non-disclosure is effective in your state. Mine is very good in the states we operate in, which is part of why as you start getting into bigger deals, we start arguing over whose state is the NDA going to be adjudicated in, because I know what my state's ones, I know the rules. I don't know Nevada's rules for non-disclosures. So you want to make sure, your protective documents are going to protect you. And if you start to enter into further agreements, you want to make sure those agreements reasonably protect you. And this is not a game for doing it on yourself. Get a team. And I'm a very strong proponent. I mean, unless it's just a crazy good offer, or you've got a situation where you're really not marketable in general, I'm obviously a believer of get a broker and let us make a market for you. If that's a real buyer, they're still going to be around in 4 months. If they're a fisher, you didn't want to sell to them anyway.
Mm-hmm. Well, and nobody's going to, I mean, if they're the only dog in the hunt, then the conversations that you have or the negotiations are if they want to do it and if you want to accept it, or the vice versa. Whereas if you have several buyers in an auction style process, the buyers are basically working themselves against each other, right?
It's amazing what fear of loss does. The only caveat I will make is I have seen, and I've done this 20 years, and I've probably seen it 3 times. So this is, and I'm looking at a potential transaction a week on average. I mean, or listing at a minimum. Probably 3 times over 20 years, I have had synergistic buyers where somebody came to me and said, here's my offer, here's my financials. And I've looked up at them and I've said, run, don't walk. It only makes sense in some executive's mind who's out in la la land. Close it as quick as you can. Mm-hmm. But, that's probably, I've probably looked at, close to 1,000 businesses, and that's happened 3 times. Mm-hmm. But so I'll never rule anything out, but in general, letting a broker, it's going to cost you, depending on the size of your business, 5 to 10%. I truly had a case where this guy came to me. He had a document storage company, and he came to me and he called me up and he goes, Greg, I got this offer, and I've had good luck with brokers in the past. I don't have a business broker. I want you to represent me. Okay. So he sent me a little bit of data. I called him back up. I said, hey, you're going to sell for 1 times revenues. He goes, great. I'll retain you. He retained me. Then he handed me the letter of intent for 1.25 times revenues. I'm like, how am I ever going to beat a letter of intent that's already 25% over? But we went out and we did our job. And as it turned out, there was a roll-up going on. And I got him 150% of what I originally quoted him, because there were 2 companies that were out trying to buy every one of these. And the first guy was when I called the first guy up and said, we found this other guy, he goes, don't tell me. It's so-and-so. And he goes, I can't compete. He goes, I don't even need to hear the offer. I can't compete. And that's why when people call me and say, can you give me a valuation and tell me if I should accept this? As I tell them, I can tell you if it's a good deal. I can tell you if it's a great deal. I can tell you if it's a bad deal. I can't tell you if it's the best deal in the market today without making a market.
See, that is really, I love that, because I think that is so true for a lot of business owners. The other thing that I think that we say in the business and to business owners is the best time to get a business valuation is 3 to 5 years, and maybe now, 1 to 3 years before you plan on selling. And it seems a little like salesy, but what I've been trying to tell business owners is have a third party come in and look at your company from the outside and get a perspective of what some potential buyer would ask questions about, because then you're more ready for those questions and you're more ready to open up your financials to somebody outside of your company. What are your thoughts in kind of getting these pre-valuations so that they have a better idea of what to do?
I think the smartest thing you can do is 5 years out, get a valuation from somebody who really knows how to underwrite a company for sale. And frankly, depending on the complexity, you might not want to pay for an opinion, but you might want to pay what an opinion costs, depending on the complexity of your company. And the reason I say that is if you have a complex company and you have debts with banks and you have loan covenants and you have leasing agreements and, maybe you have a union contract or you have, complexities in your employment structure. You have a couple key people who could really hurt you if they left, hurt your value or hurt the buyer's value. With 5 years ahead, if we really understand those, we have time to correct them. Even with 3 years, we can correct a lot of them. When I'm looking at an owner and I'm telling him, your buyer's really excited, but Bob doesn't have a non-compete and Bob really has the customer relationships sewn down, and my buyer wants a year or 2 year non-compete, and he'll pay him for it. He'll pay him well for it, but he's going to pay him like an employee, not an owner, well for it. You as a seller are in a terrible spot, because if Bob quits, now you got to run your business without, now A, you're not going to have a sale, and B, you got to run your business without Bob when you're trying to retire. If you have that conversation with them 3 years before, yeah, it sucks, but you were already planning on working hard for 3 years. Now you got time, and I get how painful it is getting good people, but now you got time that if it takes 2 or 3 of them to get the keeper, you can do it. You can do it with that stay agreement. A stay agreement is very powerful. Stay agreements, in the simplest form, basically, usually it's a bonus of about 50% of what the person makes. And it says, if you stay for any reason after I leave, whether it's a business sale, whether it's you get hit by a bus. People get hit by buses. Business owners even get hit by buses, and then their families have to run this damn business. It would be really good to know your key people are locked in or they're going to feel locked in because they're going to get a bonus for helping your family out now, or they're going to get a bonus for helping you maximize your value. And so maybe you make it that into the second year and in the third year, they get paid 25% each year, a 2-year bonus, if they stay 2 years and 3 years. I will say a savvy second in command or third in command is going to ask you to buy an annuity for that because they've got friends who didn't get paid on that deal. But I'm just saying that can powerfully, we've sold businesses where they had a good salesman, and frankly, the reason for the merger was the bigger company wanted that good salesman, and the good salesman was excited about having more products, and it significantly increased the value. So understanding those drivers, those intangible ones, and if you can, locking them down so that they're going to stay with you, assuming their health is okay. We can't quite control that.
But you make a good point, and I think that one kind of a tangent to that point is, understanding the business value sooner. Let's even just say you're 1 to 3 years out. I've had business owners that I've said, okay, your business is worth $1 million right now. And they're like, well, what happens if we increase revenue and we increase cash flow, and in 3 years we're at this level? What's our value? And we go to that level and we say, okay, your value is now 1.7 million. And they're like, what? Like they actually start to question, do I want to continue to do this for 3 to 5 years, or am I really kind of done? And I think that helps to see, because if the answer is, oh, well, if you do these things in 3 to 5 years, you're going to be worth 5 million. Well, I think we're all on board, right? Then we're all like motivated to get to that point. But if it's just a smaller increment of change, it could actually be the catalyst that allows them to say, you know what, I think I am closer to done with this situation. So what do I need to do to just make a good sale and all of the things that you're talking about, as opposed to, am I going to hit a home run in 5 years or not? And I think that only somebody with some background in valuation can kind of help you understand those metrics, right?
Yes. It's very hard to hit a home run. They happen. They absolutely happen. But most industries don't lend themselves to what I would say home runs you can count on. They're just too difficult. There's too many other competitors. It's too easy to get into. Again, there's a litany of reasons your buyer pool is going to have as to why it really is a 4 multiple, like every other business, even in that industry, even though yours, we see why you think it's a 5, it's better, but it's really a 4 because that's how we see the risk. And it's very hard to escape from that box. And it's very hard to, really increase cash flows if you're not willing to really take risk. And frankly, most business owners that have a good but mature business, they don't want to take that risk because they don't want to make nothing for 2 years if they do a huge marketing campaign, to really go to the next level and it doesn't work.
And they could be adverse to the risk or the debt. You have a lot of good business owners that just don't want debt. And sometimes you have to take on some debt to grow the business. And so that always kind of keeps them a little bit, but not always, but those are the types of things that I think are good to discuss.
And it depends on the industry, and it depends, again, the risk tolerance of the owner, and frankly, the industry. I do a lot of work with contractors. Debt kills contractors. If you got a lot of equipment If you're in an equipment required part, those guys have different kinds of stomachs. In past downturns, I don't know what they do now. When I was growing up in the business, they would hide their equipment in downturns. They would drive it off the, pick dump truck operators. The owners would have their men hide the trucks at night so they couldn't take them. I don't know with all the modern technology if that's still doable. But it's a level of fortitude that it took in those industries to survive downturns, especially if you were a guy who, was going to grow from 10 trucks to 40 in the next boom.
Sure.
You were hiding the 10 that were still subject to a lien when
Well,
it hit.
And you have a good point. I mean, that's the thing is debt in some businesses is good. Debt in other businesses is not good, but you need to have a good perspective from a third party. Now, we have a couple more questions because this is all good information. But one of the questions is, is there a way, but how are business brokers kind of getting creative during this time in order to sell a business in an economic downturn? Are there tricks, or are there just a lot of buyers still out there? They're just waiting for the sellers to be ready, or what do you see happening right now?
It's going to sort of circle back to the valuation and what do you have to do. Really, the key is it's probably going to sell for a little less, unless, like liquor stores are not selling for less because they're actually doing better and maybe they go back to normal, but nobody sees a big collapse. So it's industry specific, but in affected industries, there's going to either be a discount or there's going to be a discount and an earn out. And the biggest issue with business brokerage, and some of this answer depends on the size business, okay? If you have a large business, large enough that I'm probably going to do outreach, say it's over 5 million in value. While I'm going to list it on a bunch of the services, I'm going to list it mainly in services the private equity groups come to. And they're not as concerned about what I say I'm going to sell it for. In fact, they don't even need that because they're going to, in fact, we don't put prices when we think there are buyers because they're going to do the same valuation I do and come back to me. And if I put a price on you, it's either going to be silly or a cap. When we get to the buyer to say the 2.5 million and under value businesses, which are typically going to be bought by somebody who wants a good business. It's an owner operator, got a nice net worth, probably going to get an SBA loan, but wants a good business. They work backwards. They're going to work from the price and see if my cash flow is 3 or 4 or whatever multiple they want. And if it isn't, they probably don't even reach out to me, which is really not well thought out because some of the best deals are with sellers who won't price it right, but they'll take offers because they just won't let us do our jobs. So they don't get as many offers as they would get. But they are serious. They just won't price it right for whatever reason. And sometimes those go for less because you're not able to create the auction environment. And they finally get an offer after 9 months. And that seems to be the market. So again, what I would say is there's really got to be an emphasis on pricing it right. I'm not saying you got to give it away, but if you're going to go 20% over the market, now is not the time. Come in at what you want to come in at, like 3% over what you want to sell it for. Make the broker work or negotiate hard. But if you don't get offers, if you don't have people coming in the door that are interested, nothing else happens. So price it close to what you want to sell it, what it really should sell for, and then recognize you may have to share in the risk depending on the industry. You may have to take 20% off the top with some sort of earnout or some sort of forgivable note or some sort of structure, so that the risk is getting shared. Because right now, I've dealt with a lot of times of uncertainty in my life, but we've never had one for this type of reason, where people can't say, well, this is like the other 6 recessions. I've lived through 4 or 5 recessions, and I was a speculative home builder with lots of debt in a couple of them. I know what it means, but we've never had one because of a virus that we don't know when it's going to go away.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of the unknown right now. And I think that buyers and sellers have to be flexible. Maybe a year ago we would have said, forget an earnout. And now you're kind of like, okay, well, do you want to get this done now or not? Because that's just what the market is telling us. One more kind of final question is, do you have any perspective of, is now the time to consider buying a franchise, or are there other business opportunities to consider that maybe people didn't consider in the past? Have you seen anything out there like that?
Here's what I'll say about franchises. I don't think it's a particularly good or bad time. I think, again, I wouldn't buy a restaurant franchise right now, although I see a couple on some of our main roads under construction. So, there are some really good franchises. But in my view, if you're paying for a franchise, because if you buy a business, and this is what I'm trying to explain to a lot of the sellers of smaller businesses, when you're selling that business, what you're selling is the intellectual property, your business system. We're in America. Even my manufacturers, they're doing assembly. They don't have a steel mill in the back of the building. They're doing light assembly of some sort. They're doing install. They're doing it's a service business. And so, keeping those people, that's the key. And I forgot my question.
That's perfect. So I'll give you a final, really easy one.
Good.
How about tell us more? So we've talked about a whole bunch of really, complex issues, but I think issues that business owners deal with. But just tell us more about you and your firm and the types of services that you provide, so that we can get a better idea of. Right now, I'm telling business owners to reach out to professionals and ask questions. And so it's a good time that even if you didn't think about selling, you should start calling really smart people like you and saying, okay, here's my business. Here's what I do. How can you help me? But tell us where you kind of specialize in the M&A world.
Sure. The bulk of what we sell, and this doesn't sound like a specialty, but it really is because it ties into the different types of buyers and financing. We sell businesses between typically about 1 and sometimes 10. The bulk of them are between 1 and 5 million in value. And the reason I'm saying that's a specialty is you might be an add-on to a local company. You might be an add-on to a private equity group that's doing a roll-up, that's trying to acquire a bunch of companies like you quickly to create more value. You're probably going to get bought by a person that wants a good business. But each of those buyer groups is going to finance differently. They're going to underwrite you differently. They're going to expect to be contacted by us or find us differently. And what we know how to do that, frankly, the bigger guys and smaller guys don't, is work with all of those groups, and make the broadest market. Yeah, when I talk to you, I'm going to know who I'm pretty comfortable the buyer is. But if you're at 3 million in value, we're going to approach all of them, and we're going to approach all of them in the way they expect to be approached. We can talk to them in their language so that they're comfortable that they're working with professionals, and they're not going to just spin their wheels, with somebody who's then going to send them junk financials that don't resemble the conversation. In fact, I will say in our markets, which is New Jersey to Maryland, a stronghold in Maryland, we add credibility because we're known brokers, and they know if we send a cash flow, either somebody has really gone out of their way to misrepresent to us, or it's going to be there, and it's there because they know we also do a lot of valuations, and so we add credibility to those transactions. And what we really do is we get in, we do we've got a 7-step sales process. If you want to sell, if you just want to be looked at 2 or 3 years in advance, we tend to do very similar. We do a calculation of value. We can customize it based on, do you want to know what a transaction was going to look like? Do you want to know how to increase value over 3 years? We tweak it to what the client is looking to learn, but we essentially follow that procedure to underwrite and understand the company. And then when the time is right, we take people to market. And again, what we know how to do is talk to them in their different ways. And we also work as valuation analysts for a lot of local lenders. So we, at least in the SBA world, we see a lot of deals besides our own. So we really see the market from both perspectives. I can only sell 3 or 4 businesses of the size I sell a year, but my partner and I each do 25 valuations for our competitors, or for banks for our competitors. So it really brings an added knowledge for the size transactions we're doing and what's really going on in the market.
No, I think that was one of the things that struck me at the beginning of this conversation, is that you said you're good at building the market and you're good at building like the buyer pool, if you will. And I think that that's really important, that sometimes sellers, it's not just about finding the right buyer, it's finding a pool of buyers that are going to drive that price up. And so that they really do get a little bit more. Now, one final question. I know I've said one final question a few times, but this is the last one. You have a new book in the works. Can you tell us anything about the book yet, or is it all? Yeah.
Oh, at this point, I could tell you about it because it's supposed to be released August 25th, I believe, 4th or 5th. Wiley is publishing it, which is a very good financial press publisher. And what I'm really talking about is valuing the types of businesses we sell, the 10 million to 5 million in revenue on and under, which is the bulk of what we do. And we value a ton of those. And the book came about because we have so many colleagues who predominantly value middle market, who dip down and frankly botch these small businesses, and they don't even know they did it. And I'm so hopeful that some of them will read the book, because it's really tough when somebody refers you, did a valuation, sends you the valuation, and basically now it's not only are you double value, but you're double value and your accountant, who are really good people. They applied perfect techniques for a $40 million revenue business, but you got a $4 million revenue business. And it doesn't price the same. It just doesn't. You've got all kinds of you've got employee concentrations. You've got you as a concentration. You've got supplier concentrations. You may have customer concentrations depending on your industry. That $40 million company has much fewer of all those, and they all add risk. And so it's really dealing with all the things that come up with smaller businesses and how do we approach them. That I'm not saying there aren't a lot of complexities with that $40 million business. There are. I've done a lot of those valuations too. Tremendous number, but they're different complexities. So that's what it's about.
a really good resource for business owners that are kind of considering selling, want to understand valuation more in depth and its application to small businesses.
And while it's a valuation book, I do have a chapter on preparing and the sales process, and it's enough to either help your other professionals, if they don't do it regularly, understand better what to do, and to help you understand how to manage them, because you can't do their job, you can't do everybody's job, none of us can. But if you ask the right questions and know where to push a little bit, let's face it, you'll always get a little better. You'll always get a little better result, because the person will be thinking harder and they'll be working harder to get it right for you. So we do have probably 75 pages on that.
Oh, that'll be awesome. I can't wait. So thank you so much. This is Greg Caruso, and you're with Harvest Business Advisors. And we're going to link all of the information to reach out to you, email, phone number, website, and such in this video. So I appreciate it. And maybe after your book launch, we'll get in there a little bit more and talk more about the book. So thanks, Greg.
we can have a very technical conversation. And
there we go.
Unlike today, although I tend to get technical, but thank you so very much.
You're welcome.
This has been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.